welcome to another episode of the Topping Off podcast, where we help general contractors, remodelers, and everyone else in the construction industry who's listening improve their business through marketing, through better use of technology, and otherwise learning from other people who are doing it in different and better ways. So today we are joined by Murray McCullough, coming from the West Coast of Coastal Craft AI. So welcome, Murray.
Hey, Kevin, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, of course, man. So you've got a pretty cool background. So if you would, let's kind of start at the beginning. Tell us what you're up to.
Yeah, totally. So I've been building stuff my whole life, starting out with tree houses and moving quickly into real houses. Basically, right after high school, I started in the trades. So I'm a carpenter by training, and I've worked for the last 15 or so years in residential construction, custom home building. Started out doing remodeling and a little bit of light commercial. And then for the past 10 years, I've been heavily in custom home building. And yeah, that kind of is where I'm at as of today. And then 2 years ago, I started using AI really heavily and trying to teach myself how to write code. Turns out AI can just do that for you. So I learned how to use AI to write code. And over the past year, I've been running a consultancy helping other general contractors implement AI into their business and understand how it can help them in a general contracting operation.
That's awesome. Before we go too deep, I do have to ask, what was the coolest feature you ever built into a treehouse?
Ooh, into a treehouse. Let's see. I built a catapult in
Yeah.
one. That that was pretty fun for young Murray. And then yeah, I would often have kind of an elite system of booby traps on the way to any treehouse just to kind of make sure I could vet who was coming in and out. So those were a couple of the high tech features.
That's amazing. Good, good. Well, back to the task at hand. What was kind of the genesis of what got you into AI?
Yeah, so to be honest, what got me into AI was uh, building houses for 15 years and starting to really feel the effects on my body
Hmm.
and wanting to think about other ways that I could contribute other than swinging a hammer because I've been doing that for a long time and I love doing that, but I've also always been a systems thinker and someone who really likes thinking about the operation and kind of how the whole system runs. And so for me, AI was sort of an intro to that. And so, like I said, I it started with the question of like, oh, maybe I could learn how to code, maybe create like a useful app for me to use internally at my own general contracting business. And pretty quickly, I discovered AI and how effective it was at solving a lot of the problems that me as a non-technical person could really start solving on my own. And so a lot of these barriers, like having to write code that have started to come down, really mean that someone like myself who's non-technical and that I'm not, I don't have a computer science background. I've spent my whole career outside, boots on, swinging a hammer, and tech felt a little daunting, and AI really just dropped that learning curve tremendously and allowed me to start solving my own problems.
Awesome. Yeah, for you and a lot of people, it's an amazing translator, I think, to sort of bridge the gap.
Yeah.
Now, when you use the term AI implementer, for those who aren't quite sure about what that means, could you just kind of define that for us?
Yeah, totally. So AI implementation really refers to the thinking and implementing of systems within a business, and AI just kind of happens to be the engine that runs those. So I think AI as a term is, you know, better thought of as kind of the engine behind a lot of your existing processes and a tool that, can be wielded in many different ways. So for me, when I implement AI for a business, it's really taking their existing systems and figuring out how can we layer in AI to help lower the amount of hours spent on administrative work and repetitive work. And that frees people up to then spend time on the stuff that really kind of moves the needle for the business more and is more enjoyable. So I think I really, as an AI implementer, try to take away the idea of AI replacing people and really think about it more as intelligence augmentation rather than it being artificial intelligence, if that makes sense. So, like, we're taking the domain knowledge that your team already has and figuring out how to augment it with a system that is better at a human at reading through copious amounts of data all at once, or reading extensive documentation and flagging little issues, like all these things that take a lot of human effort to do. Implementing AI really helps reduce that and lets people focus on the stuff that makes the job fun.
Hmm. So let's dive into maybe an actual use case, and it could be like the common one that most people are asking for. But if you would kind of walk us through what are people sort of what are they asking for, and if you'd like to give two examples, maybe like what are the things that they're not asking for that you recommend that they really need?
Yeah, totally. So I think the first use case that I like to start with, just when I'm explaining AI to people, not necessarily the first one they need to introduce in their own business, but the idea that really sparked it for me and that I've been on ever since was the idea of being able to chat with your documents. So for me, as someone who's been in the field my whole career, like the amount of time I spend as a construction project manager scrolling through PDFs on my phone when my hands are muddy, it's raining outside, and I'm on, the Simpson Strong Tie website trying to get documentation for how to install a new hanger. Like every PM's been there. And when I realized you could now create an AI tool where you essentially upload that entire spec book from Simpson, and then you can just text a question, say, hey, how am I supposed to install an LUS26Z? And it's just like, bam, here's the answer. That was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And I think for a lot of folks, you might be able to see just from that one use case how many other examples of that same use case could be used, whether we're talking about a spec book, whether we're talking about a code book, that's incredibly helpful. So I've uploaded entire code books to an AI tool and created basically a little Washington residential code expert in my pocket. So instead of having to go, scan through the code book either on my phone or in an actual binder in a job trailer, I can just ask a question in natural language on my phone right there in my pocket, get an answer, keep moving. So that's kind of a tactical example that I think hopefully inspires other folks to realize what they could be using AI for in terms of being able to talk to their documentation. And that's kind of a weird idea. Um, and so I encourage people to not be too weirded out by AI as a concept and really just try it, because I think, especially for builders, most of us, I think, are people that learn by doing. And that's how we got into this business in the first place. And so I, for one, have really only learned how to do this by doing it myself and experimenting. So that's a really cool use case that people can play around with. And I'm happy to talk about what tools they can use to make that for themselves. Um, and then other use cases include uh, automations. So and that kind of lives in a separate camp. Automations are less about using an LLM, which is a large language model. That's what ChatGPT is. That's what Claude is. That's what Gemini is. And automations are more structured and more rigid. And so those are, something like, hey, we get 25 vendor invoices in our email every single day. Can we grab the attachment of that invoice from our email and move it into a folder in our cloud storage automatically and have it rename the file? Because like that little use case is an example of something that people spend hours and hours doing. And I think for general contractors, that's just not a process that they're used to thinking about in terms of something that could be automated. I mean, now a lot of people are asking for that, but historically, and at most businesses I talk to, that's still someone manually downloading an attachment off 25 invoices to their desktop, uploading it themselves, and retyping the name. Um, so that's an example of like an automation, which I would say lives in a slightly different camp than an AI tool.
And that sounds like bad news for the relatives that are usually the ones stuck doing some of that clerical work. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. It's bad news for your nephew, but if they want to learn the tools, they can. Then they'll be able to help you with a lot more.
And if you would, referring to automations, can you clarify, does that cross over into what you would classify as an agent, or is that something else entirely?
Yeah, so I think, the term agent is very hot. It has been for the last year. And so people have competing definitions of what that means. And ultimately, I don't think business owners should get super hung up on which term is used for what. I think that, again, that's where you can rely on someone who's implementing AI with you on your team to help understand. But at the end of the day, how I think about an agent is it's an automated process, but at some step in that process, you're asking AI to make a judgment call on your behalf. So, if for as an example, like the automation we just talked about, it's not really needing to think at all, right? It's just like it's more like a solving a math problem or wiring up a circuit. Like it either works or it doesn't, and then there's rules to that. Whereas with an AI agent, you might say, for example, we have a client who has a website chat interface on their website. So it's, a little chat bubble in the corner, and that uses Claude, an LLM AI, as the engine that can answer questions about their business. It can help qualify potential customers, and then all of that feeds into a Google Sheet so that then the business owner, they have a complete Google Sheet with all of the chat logs and the user conversations. And then on a monthly basis, I have an automation that pulls all of that data out of the Google Sheet. It uses AI to then read all of those and summarize it. And then it uses AI to create a document on the back end, which is a report that says, hey, you had 35 new conversations this month. Here are the top 5 most asked questions, and here are the 3 people you should follow up with first. So that would be an example of how you kind of use AI within the context of an automation to make a judgment or use its knowledge or its engine power to read the documents and actually extract valuable information from that and present it to you again.
Now you mentioned previously, and I've heard this a lot. I was at New York Builds a couple of weeks ago and watched architectural use of AI. Is the idea of basically inputting institutional knowledge and institutional data, which you kind of mentioned earlier, into your agent, if we're going to use that term. Does that basically make the company historian, or sort of what happens when you have all of the data existing within the AI tool beyond what you've discussed already? Like, are there some things that become advantageous in strategizing or planning, or why is it that the AI architects were talking about, basically like, hey, in this case, I'm thinking of a 100-year-old company that said our AI agent now has 100 years worth of data. So what do
Mm-hmm.
they do with that 100 years of data?
Yeah, that's a great question. 100 years is a lot of data. I'm curious what the stuff going back 100 years is from. Um, I think, yeah, the data conversation is interesting, and I think it there's a lot of layers that can be kind of challenging to wade through. So on a broad level, an AI is only as good as the data it has access to and the context and guardrails you give it. And so you'll hear a lot of talked about prompting or instructions, and these are documents you can create that guide the AI and how it's supposed to interact with your knowledge. So I think sometimes people get a little AI gets a little oversimplified in terms of how it's applied, and then I think that leads to why there's kind of this frankly poor sentiment about it because it's it's talked about as if it can do everything all at once, and it actually takes a lot of human finesse to get the output you need. So, to try to answer your question a little more, yes, having your agent have access to your data is incredibly valuable. And without access to your data, it's really not that helpful. In the case of a company that says its agent has access to 100 years of data, again, that could be really powerful, but that's going to require that they have the right prompting and instructions underlying that AI system so that it knows what to do with that information, so it can sort through that information. So I think expecting you're just going to give AI a ginormous corpus of data and it can just like figure out what to do with it, I don't think that's entirely true. But I do think that understanding AI is only as valuable as the data you connect it to is pretty key.
And do you find in your practice that different scales of company have different needs of AI implementation, or like do you sort of scale it as like crawl, walk, run?
Yeah, I do have a concept I tend to refer to as the AI ramp. And so, really, it's about starting with the low hanging fruit and the low risk things because a lot of people, businesses want to, you know, automate everything and like 10x their business overnight because that's kind of what the media landscape explains it as doing. Um, and I really try to start with people on like, okay, let's pick a low liability task, like some a simple AI tool that your field crew can use to like access your SOPs more efficiently, or like an HR assistant or an email drafting assistant. So rather than because this the underlying point here is to focus on what your team's already doing. So I can almost guarantee that most people inside of an organization these days are using ChatGPT or some other AI tool to help them draft emails. And so if we recognize that, then how do we get them from level 0 to level 1 of email drafting? So for me, that looks like instead of having all your team members just like throwing an email into ChatGPT raw and saying, hey, like make this sound more professional or whatever, you can have a skill built inside of that that says, anytime a user asks about email drafting, follow these brand guidelines for how to talk like our business. Here's our business's core values. Here's the things that matter to us. Here's some examples of what a professional email from someone at our company looks like. Those are the sorts of things that start to really tailor the AI response, um, and just get massively better output for that. So, to answer your question about whether different businesses have different needs, I think yes and no. Like I think a lot of business do have the same core needs. Now, the way their business is structured is different. So if we're talking about a 25-person design build firm versus a 400-person underground utilities contractor, like one of those teams has a whole bunch of software systems and one of those teams has a handful. And so their needs and goals are going to be different. Some and I really don't try to like infer or assume what a business's priorities are. I start by interviewing people at the company. So I talk to project managers, I talk to estimators, I talk to people in the field about, hey, what are the processes that are bogging you down the most? What's the one thing in your department that everyone agrees is a total pain? And let's try to figure out that first.
That's great. Yeah. So it's a very tailored approach within the guidelines of the ramp. It sounds like is that accurate.
Yeah, exactly. And so that the idea behind the ramp is like we start with something low risk, get people familiar with the tools. Then, the more they kind of build tooling alongside someone like myself, the ways of working with AI kind of start to rub off. Because the reality is like AI is a completely different tool than Google search or than anything people are used to using. And so it kind of requires a new framework. And I think in my experience, the best way for people to learn that is just doing it hands-on. And so that's why the AI ramp can allow people to build capability internally. Because ultimately, the most benefit for your company is going to be when your top 10 project managers all are really adept at using the tools and building out their own, you know, custom tools within your AI infrastructure because they're the ones that have the institutional knowledge. They're the ones that know exactly how the process currently operates. And I'm just there to help facilitate that learning process and help kind of vet some ideas so they can waste less time and approach it in a way that's low risk and not gonna, leave the company wide open in terms of liability.
Sure, sure, yeah. And you brought up liability now, so I guess what do you find the risk tolerance and appetite to be in the companies that you work with? And the headlines of these different AI softwares, like how, I guess to what degree do you try to mitigate that or like make people comfortable in utilizing the tools?
Yeah, so I think liability is super important, right? Like we're home builders, we're used to thinking about risk all day long. And when it comes to the work I do with clients, I make sure that we are involving all of the people that need to help make decisions on AI usage inside of the company. So that includes helping with, you know, policy documentation and internal SOPs for how all that is supposed to be used, and then training people effectively. And yeah, I do think about that a lot for my clients and focus on using the tools that have robust, data security and privacy built into the service so that whenever you're signing up for a service or using a particular AI tool, you're again not left totally wide open. And so that's why I really spend a lot of time with people thinking about when it's appropriate to build their own solution versus when they should just be buying something off the shelf that already comes with the security they need.
When I was at the architectural discussion on AI, they kind of talked about someone asked the question, are there any of these AI tools that you would trust to make blueprints at this point? And at that time, they had kind of said, no, we don't feel like there's anything that's like good enough to replace an architect for the drafting aspect. Um, and they brought up the point that ultimately, if you are the architect or the engineer, like you have to put your stamp on it. So like you would not want to do anything unless it was you had 100% autonomy on it. Do you find anything in your practice that people want to use AI for something that you kind of pump the brakes and say like, hey, it's not there yet?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's a lot that's not there yet. And I think it can be a tricky conversation to navigate because sometimes, business owners and people running these companies feel a lot of pressure to be using AI and to be speeding up all of their processes all at once. And yeah, I mean, some big ones are like anything involving contracts, other than like we can create an AI assistant that can help review a contract and flag potential issues. That can be super valuable, but I'm not letting AI build a contract for you wholesale. And yeah, I think it's like there's so much catching up to do that business owners have in terms of what's capable now versus what was possible a year ago. And so I feel like, I mean, in my view, there's an ocean of stuff you can do that lives in the low liability camp that still can live in the camp of huge return on investment and time savings. So in my view, I'm like, why waste time on stuff that could result in like a huge privacy breach when there's so much stuff that is not nearly as risky?
Certainly. Now, a lot of what you've said so far seems to be internal processes and documentation and automation. Do you also help contractors work on sort of like the outside interaction of their business in the way of recruiting or marketing or anything that's sort of like outside of their internal structure?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of use cases across the board, and so that definitely falls into external communication sometimes. So, a product that I've built that works really well for folks is a website chat interface. And so that one I kind of described earlier, that really was built based on my own experience running a general contracting business where, you're getting a call in the middle of the day and you're up on a roof and it's from someone who wants a project and you're like, yeah, hey, I'll call you back. And then you forget to. And so having a website chat has actually been really helpful for allowing, especially the smaller businesses, to qualify leads. And then, we build an automation so they basically get an email anytime a new person interacts with their chat and leaves contact information. We can actually sort of reverse engineer the chat experience. So instead of it just being this sort of you ask a question and you get an answer back, we can actually have the chat interface sort of ask a series of questions that help qualify them so you know what kind of customers you want. And so you define that for the AI. And it can help you actually qualify. So that is an example of like an external facing tool that can be really helpful. Um, yeah, ultimately, I don't pretend to be the expert in every possible field when I when I'm working with a client. So I really try to be sort of the orchestrator and the implementer, if you will, of AI because I'm not a marketer and I'm not an estimator, but I understand the need for both of those roles in a construction company, and I can help understand how to use AI tools thoughtfully to kind of supercharge the people inside who are already doing that great work.
And I want to make a quick plug. I have some friends. If you're listening to this saying, well, I don't want my customers talking to a chat bot because they're not, they're going to have a bad experience. I have some friends that built a chatbot for one of their clients, and they work actually with mobile home sales. And the chatbot was so good that people would call the office and they would say, "Well, I want to make sure Janice gets her commission. She was so helpful." And they would say, "Oh, Janice is on vacation this week." Consistently, everybody was calling it by name about how helpful it was. So, yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, which leads to like the interesting question around disclosure of when someone is talking to an AI. And um, yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, good on you for bringing up the considerations of that. Um, so let's see. What do you feel? You kind of talked about people that are trying to go too far, too fast. Um, what do you think is like maybe a little bit, and this could be a hot take, like what's a little bit overhyped in the AI industry right now?
That's a good question. An easier question to be answered would be what's not overhyped, I guess. Um, yeah, I think the whole I feel like the implementation itself is kind of the piece that gets overhyped. Like when you read about AI, it sounds like you just sign up for 20 bucks a month on ChatGPT and like it's game over and your business is doing numbers, And I feel like that this goes back to like the sentiment thing I said earlier, but I've been really interested lately to read like um, reports on different countries around the globe and what the kind of broad sentiment is. And it's interesting that the United States is pretty low on AI sentiment. And I think part of that is because, and I've witnessed this with my clients, like they sign up for an AI tool and they start chatting and they think that this tool can like, yeah, read their plans. Cause like if you go read about what AI can do, you'd be like, why couldn't it read plans? It's, I just upload it and it says it knows everything. And like, and then you have it read your plans and you get garbage. And I think yeah, so I think like image reading, it can do some things really well. It can do some things really poorly. I think it comes down to experimentation. Like you got to try it. If people aren't using these AI tools, then they're never going to want to. And I think once you start using them, you pretty quickly find the edges and where it's good and where it's not. And so I think this whole idea that we can automate away an entire role or like that you don't need X person anymore is a fallacy. And I think that AI is simply allowing us all to do more work on a on a shorter time scale. And there's pros and cons to that. But I think overall, like AI as a tool is overhyped in terms of the simplicity with which it works and its ability to take an entire role. I think it requires a lot more orchestration and thoughtfulness to actually get real value out of it.
And I think you bring up some interesting points. And, myself being sort of the caveman dabbling in AI, I've definitely reached the point where I've learned how to push it to the point that it breaks. So when you talk about like image review or something, or like, and when I say it breaks, like I had it reviewing something the other day, and it basically turned into a pendulum where I was trying to like surgically make edits, and it was like completely wasting drafts. And I was like, just stop. I just need you to fix what I'm talking about. Or like, it gives you a pep talk about what a good job you did in drafting it.
Totally.
And it's like, no, I just want you to edit this and be done with it. So yeah.
Yeah, when I think like there's so much and I'll try to avoid going on like a full rant here, but there is so much to these tools that kind of doesn't show up in the LinkedIn posts or the Super Bowl ads. That really leads people to have like a bad experience with it, you know? So like the concept of a context window is like square one if you've been working with AI for a while, but it's like not something that the average business owner knows about because it's like not in it doesn't show up when you're signing up for ChatGPT. Like, hey, there's this thing called a context window, and if you have the same chat that you've been going back to for the last 3 weeks, like it doesn't remember anything you're saying anymore. Um, so there's a lot of these like core things that I just think, frankly, the AI labs and AI companies are not necessarily doing the best job at of educating their customers, and so that kind of creates a need for people offering services like I do to say, hey, like let me show you how to use this because some of what they're saying it can do is true, but you need to know how to work with it.
And most of these tools, we've kind of talked about people thinking $20 a month solves all their problems. Um, what do you like? What is the experience like in scaling these tools for enterprises? So, are there some that accommodate teams better than others? And even if this sort of rolls into what is the landscape of possibilities out there right now in terms of what people could be using?
Yeah, I mean, so the landscape is like completely endless. So I empathize with anyone who feels like they're just getting overloaded with possible options. I think, everyone's got different takes on this. My thought is that the frontier labs, which I think of as being OpenAI, which create ChatGPT, that's their product. Anthropic, their product is Claude. That's the one I use the most. And Google has their product Gemini. All of those are the same product essentially. Um, and all of those, definitely have team and enterprise plans available. They have, like seat-based usage and um, I mean, there's the business model is really evolving in terms of how they price AI, how they price usage. So I think there's, businesses really have to kind of do their homework in the moment to figure out what the best path for them is going to be, just because the documentation and offerings changes constantly, like which makes it really hard as a consultant trying to stay informed for your clients when like one week they ask about something and you're like, no, it's impossible. And then the next week you're like, actually, you can do that. Um, so yeah, I think there's those three are kind of the powerhouses in terms of an LLM. And so those are I view that as kind of in the same camp as like maybe a Microsoft or a Google in terms of the kind of relationship your business is going to have with them. Those to me are kind of the elemental tools in the same way that like every business needs a way to write documents, whether they're using Google Docs or they're using Microsoft Word. Similarly, they're going to need the kind of broad AI tool that they're using for a lot of stuff. Now, that won't be the only tool they're using. There's, of course, like countless options for specific AI tools and ones that are specific to a certain workflow. So estimating tools or proposal writing tools or I mean every possible use case is being tackled by some new AI startup. And so I really try to walk people through like, hey, are some of those worth buying? Are some of those ones that you can buy yourself? And I actually wrote about this recently, but um, all the big AI companies right now are kind of converging around this similar sort of all-in-one platform where you have a chat interface that everyone's used to. They have an agent building platform where you can actually plug the AI into your existing systems. And then they have, um, sorry, I just totally blanked on the kind of third pillar of that. Um, oh, vibe coding. So that's another term people probably heard. Frankly, it's one that I don't spend a lot of time talking to my clients about because I think it's not the use cases that jump out to me are typically ones that are um, executing code on your behalf, whether that's in like uh, a Claude interface or an OpenAI interface, or sorry, ChatGPT. So it's hard to like simplify all this stuff for people, there's a million ways to do it. And yeah, I think starting with one of these kind of core AI tools and then vetting what other ones you might need. Because I guess the last thing I'll say is like, as these companies all sort of converge on this one sort of all in one platform, what they're allowing is you to be able to connect out to your existing data. So, what that looks like in practice is okay, I have a ChatGPT account, but ChatGPT, I can connect it to my Microsoft environment or to my Google environment. And so now inside of your ChatGPT chat, it can also look at your email inbox, it can look at your documents, it can look through your folders. And so that's where it really starts becoming super powerful. And that's why I encourage clients to evaluate the big kind of major player AI platforms and then decide which one to use because again, kind of for reasons like security and privacy, it's just in my view so much better to pick a tool like Claude.ai, hook it up via their native connections to your Stripe account, your Square account, your, you know, any tool, any tool you have at this point almost can be connected to that. And um, that's just, a huge level up from like just asking ChatGPT out of the box to help you with your business is saying, hey, go look at my last month's invoices and like tell me what's missing, or look at my meeting notes transcripts from the past 6 months and tell me like what the themes were, or like um, all of these connections are really really helpful.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. I've just started dabbling and having connections through Claude, and yesterday I had it like I was talking to it about like time management and like structuring like some strategic things I wanted to work on, and it brought up, hey, it would help if I could have access to your email so I could sort of, like, let's knock that out. Like, that's an easy win if, like, we can give you a hit list of what your most important emails you need to respond to are every day. And
Yeah.
then, so that was easy. And then it was, well, if we have access to your calendar, we can review how you spend your time and we can find out where the gaps are. And so today was the first day I basically had it used, and blocks of time were more specific. So it was, hey, you probably have more energy for this after lunch, so we're going to move this to 1 o'clock if that's good for you. And then when I like clicked on it, I had the detail of like, here's the goal that you should aim to accomplish in that session of productivity,
Wow.
which is amazing. Again, like I'm a caveman at this stuff and still like blown away by, the insight. Have you, with any of your clients yet, or are you kind of like independently dabbling with sort of the standalone machines like the Perplexity or like OpenClaw yet?
I really haven't. I definitely follow it because I read about AI all the time, but and we can certainly talk about it because I think it is like super interesting and maybe where a lot of things are headed. Right now, I'm firmly in the camp of do not give AI access to your computer, and like let's focus on teaching everyone how to use ChatGPT appropriately and with some real value and some guardrails and some, let's build you some skills, let's build some projects. These are all features of these tools that make them dramatically more useful. Let's focus on those things before we worry about just like getting ChatGPT to click around your desktop and move all your files around. It's super cool though. I mean, I've definitely like experimented with giving an AI access to files on my computer and having it organize them. So I'm sure that's coming, but right now to me it feels like I see how people are using AI right now, and with the level of sophistication that most people are kind of at, like I would not recommend people try hooking it up to their computer.
It's kind of the classic computing adage of junk in, junk out, right? So it's like people don't know how to wrangle it, and so it, bull in the china shops their system.
Yeah, totally. And I have another like I was talking to a client, and this was kind of an initial call we had, and they were like, "Oh, well, are we getting the Toyota or the Lamborghini?" Which I thought was kind of a funny example, and then I've kind of run with that metaphor. Um, because in my head I was like, well, I mean, you should want the Toyota all day long. It's like
Right.
it's a fraction of the cost, it's more reliable. And in the case of AI, like it can, like the Lamborghini can crash at a really high speed, and it's probably a lot more dangerous to use. And so, in the same way that AI can read through 10,000 documents in like a fraction of the time it takes a human, it can also like just make an absolute mess of your data in as much time.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm getting this sort of story I heard wrong, but when we were talking earlier about OpenClaw and Perplexity, these are classified as what I understand to be autonomous agents, where it's like you give it a high level goal to accomplish, and it will utilize whatever you allow it to utilize to achieve the goal. So I heard about somebody who was trying to train one of these to be a social media manager, but had inadvertently provided it access to like a credit card. Apparently, this thing purchased a $3,500 social media
I think I
course
saw that.
and
Yeah.
like trained itself and then sort of showed up to work like ready to go, boss. I did my course. Let's do it. So they're like, do not put these systems on your computer. Like they need to live in their little sandbox.
Yeah, totally. Um, Gosh, yeah, that's so funny. I think I read a similar story like that. And yeah, I just think like it, people are still at a pretty basic level, and that's totally fine. But I think I still encourage people to use caution. I think we all get used to stuff really fast as human beings, and that's a good thing and a bad thing sometimes. And I feel like for a lot of the folks I talk to, it's just like, I'm like, why are we talking about OpenClaw when you've got a chat sitting there that you've been going back to for 3 weeks and you're wondering why it sucks so much?
Yeah, sure. I think you're talking about me, actually. Yeah. Okay. So, for those listening, if you're going to give them like, "Hey, look, you need to try it," like, what's the one thing they need to do? Like, what do they need to download, and what do they need to try to start assessing their own potential of using AI in their businesses?
Yeah, I think a great first step would be go to Claude.ai and sign up for a free account and start having a conversation with it. Most people, I'm guessing, have already done something similar to that. And so, what I would suggest as kind of the next level up would be take a big PDF you have access to, or take like the transcript. If you have like a recorded transcript from like a really long meeting you had with a supplier or something, upload that and then start asking questions about that meeting or about that document. You could ask, in the case of a meeting, you could ask questions like, what are the action items, or what are the themes from this meeting, or what was, the most rewarding question that I asked? Like, of all the questions that were asked, like, what got the richest, most sort of well thought out answer? And in the case of a PDF, it could be anything. So, if we're talking about a a really long contract, like ask it to flag issues, ask it to um, ask you 5 questions that you might have not thought about. I think that if we're wanting to go down the realm of like tips for how to use AI, that is one of the biggest tips I have is ask ChatGPT or ask Claude to ask you questions before it does something. So if you're you have a project in mind and you want to have Claude help you build it, in that initial prompt, finish that prompt by saying, ask me some clarifying questions before you start. I do that on like any project that I'm building because 9 times out of 10, it flags something that I hadn't thought about, and it allows the AI to tell you what it needs, and then you give it what it needs, and then the answer is pretty amazing. And I feel like that as a broad framework for any AI project should be thought of less as like, oh, it's this genie in a bottle. You just go there with your problem and it solves it. But instead, think of it as like this engine that you need to feed with all of the right fuel, get it all set up in the same way. And, it's like so many, played out metaphors for like thinking ahead before you then execute the plan. It's like, I spend, you should be spending more time on your prompt than you do waiting for the response back. And so if you can feed it all the information and the tools and everything that it needs, it's going to just work wonders for you instead of asking it to just guess what's in your head because it cannot read minds.
Yeah.
No, yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's so funny the way that you were explaining the prompts. I mean, in the construction world, anyone who's sort of like a business development or operational consultant will talk about avoiding the just enough to start phenomenon, where like people want to just jump in and,
Mm,
start building, start making money, and
yeah,
never goes well. Yeah, chat or any AI tool, same situation. So spend your, let's put it in, spend your time in pre-construction is maybe the way that
yes,
we talk
yes,
about that.
yeah. I think we need like all of the appropriate metaphors for it to really like set in with GCs, and I think that's a good one because every GC I worked for is like really focused on like making pre-con better and spend so much time thinking about it. So we should be doing the same thing if you're asking AI to go do a year's worth of work for you on, a project. Like maybe take some time to explain it and like ask questions. Like use it as a thought partner. Don't just use it as like this. It's not the same as like going to search on Google.
So you mentioned earlier the idea of like the content or context box for the tools. So is that something that you learned from the tool, or like where could people go who want to get better at using the tools, like to know some of these like extra features? Like, are they watching YouTube, or like where do you recommend that they check out?
Yeah. So I think obviously like yeah, YouTube can be a great resource depending on what you find. Personally, I think um, workshops have been really helpful. So like there's a lot of people running really great webinars on like, hey, we're just going to teach you how to use this one feature, whether it's, we're going to teach you how to use Claude Chat or we're going to teach you how to use Claude Cowork. I think those are really valuable. So like one place I would point people towards is 9X. They're an educational institution that, or not institution, they're a business that do education around AI for businesses, and they also offer a lot of great free courses. Um, so those can be really helpful if you just need to like kind of get in there and see what these tools even look like on the inside. Um, Again, you're probably going to have to sort of adopt the workflow for how it might apply to your business. I think that's just a reality of, you know, construction is an industry that's often kind of not in the limelight when it comes to tech. And so like I've watched a lot of videos that are like maybe a little directed toward marketers, but have some useful nuggets that I can sort of come away with. Um, so yeah, I think webinars, workshops can be great. Yeah, a place where I did a couple of like boot camps that this would be, more at the advanced level for people that are wanting to like dedicate some solid time to learning these tools. Um, there's an organization called 100 School, like 100 School. Um, they're phenomenal, really, really great education, and they have courses for free, courses that are paid from beginner to advanced. Um, and yeah, I think those are great because I think it's nice to have a community of people that you're working with so you feel less kind of on the outside. And yeah, I think having some practical education just around, yeah, stuff like context windows and just like a crash course in all of these terms that are really important to know, I would point people in that direction.
And speaking of webinars, Murray and I are actually going to be co-hosting a webinar on Thursday, April 16th, 2026 at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. If you're hearing this episode after that, that webinar will be on YouTube, so you can find it on the GC Sherpa YouTube channel or on gcsherpa.com website. But otherwise, if you want to register for the webinar, you can go to gcsherpa.com and you'll find it in our events. And Murray's also going to be sending it out to his newsletter, and you'll have it on the socials. But we're basically going to go in depth into a few of the things that we talked about. So Murray's going to show you sort of what are some of the internal processes that you might be employing in your business. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that relates to finding customers, finding people to work at your company, and then also how customers are using chat tools and AI tools to find you. We're going to look at my nasty bathroom I have in my old house and how chat tells me who I should hire to fix it and also what it should cost. So a lot of things that are changing the landscape on equipping customers. So Murray, absolutely thank you so much for being here. You've dropped just tons of insight and inspiration and imagination on, I hope it lights a fire under a lot of people. Where can people go to find you to keep in touch?
Yeah, so people can find me at coastalcraftai.com. That's the best place to get everything you need to know. I got my contact in there. I also have a monthly newsletter I write. That's AI for home builders. So you can find that on my website. And I share that on LinkedIn as well. So if people want to connect with me there, I'm happy to chat to folks there and answer questions. Yeah, those are the main places. But thanks so much for having me, Kevin. I really appreciate the chance to talk to your audience and hope that some of the GCs out there are feeling inspired to get their hands dirty on these tools and figure out how to use them.
Yeah, and I know they will be, and I'm pumped for our webinar. So again, thank you for listening to the Topping Off podcast. If you like this episode, we'd love for you to give us a rating. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you at the top. Thank you again.